Tarrant County Master Gardener Association has partnered with the Tarrant Regional Water District to encourage water conservation. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean that water to meet drinking standards for our communities. There are currently 2.3 million people living in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. There's also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. So be sure and check out SaveTarrantWater.com to sign up for their free services.
Today we'll talk about fall vegetable gardening. I'm Harold Annis, Tarrant County Master Gardener. I was in the intern class of 2011. Have a 2-acre lot in South Lake that I have a fairly sizable garden, about 10,000 square feet, that I grow vegetables in. So you name it. If I like it, I grow it. So today we'll talk about several key components in gardening. This is the outline for a much longer presentation, and if you want to do that, we'll just stay here for 3 hours, and we'll cover it in an hour, the highlights of it. So we'll talk about the site, what kind of, where am I going to plant my vegetables? Sun, how much sun do we need? Seed, what kind of seeds will we plant? Where will we get them? And what varieties are the best? The season, when do I plant? And when do I plant what type of vegetable? And soil. Soil is obviously a major component in gardening. Here's my garden. Told you it was sizable, but this would be in the springtime, probably April. And the Stonehenge back there is how I do tomatoes in the spring. Wrap them with frost cloth, and it gives them additional protection from the cold and from the wind. So there's some of the vegetables I picked on a particular day in July. So that was kind of the height of the season. And you notice this box up here is full of tomatoes also. And when that happens, I just have to find a lot of friends. So there's a lot of different ways. You know, you saw the picture of my garden. You can garden in the ground if you have a large enough space, or want to dedicate a part of your backyard or front yard. I had a neighbor that did his garden in the front yard. He called it a show garden. So he was from West Texas. So here's another idea of raised beds. And this is at Grapevine Colleyville ISD's Heritage Elementary School. Heritage is right across the street from Colleyville Heritage High School. So these are raised beds. They're 3 foot by 8 foot or 3 foot by 7 foot, depends on the curvature of the sidewalk there. This one we made with a toe kick to help specifically one child that was in the 4th grade in our garden club that could not stand on her own. She had a walker. So we designed this, and she could stand up, support herself with her toes in the toe kick, and she could plant and harvest vegetables. So that's an idea that you can use if you have one of your family members is limited. This is Western red cedar. It makes a good box and lasts a long time. These are now 6 years old and still very solid. Here's another example of some enabling beds that we have at our demonstration garden at the Resource Connection. That's really by Tarrant County South Campus. That's an idea. If you have somebody in a wheelchair, this gives you wheelchair access. So don't think you have to garden in the ground. You can do a lot of other things. Okay, you can garden in pots, and a lot of people do that. With tomatoes, my best recommendation is using a large pot, 30 gallons. I would say at least a 15-gallon, unless you're doing a small patio tomato or something like that. When I dump the soil out of this pot, the bottom of it will be totally roots, like you'd dump out a potted plant that you grow in your house. So the root structure of a tomato is fairly large. So don't don't scrimp on the pot size. If you get the largest that you can, it helps retain the water and you don't have to water it quite as frequently. Another idea, so far as where you're going to plant, you can use some vertical space. Here's a picture of a lattice that goes up, and you can grow cucumbers, beans, even cantaloupe. And if you're brave enough, you could do watermelons. But just know that the cantaloupe and watermelon, you'll have to support with some device. And I say that's where pantyhose are used today. You just tie the pantyhose underneath the fruit and support it by the wire on the fence. So that way you can expand your garden. So also you want to make a plan. Okay, so here's a good plan. And if this is north, then you would want to put the tall vegetables on the north side. I think this is tomato plants here. So you don't want to shade out the low growing fruit or plants. Okay. So here's Neil Sperry's statement, have a plan. So I say that's good for the spring garden. That's a good time to do is December and January. So you can be gardening in the house. For the fall garden right now, you could do that plan or do it in July. Because some of the things you'll want to plant in August and even July for tomatoes. So don't overcrowd. Know how big the plant is going to be. Sun. So we do need sun. Different plants need different lengths of sunlight per day. And there's lots of things that you can adjust to your site or to your situation. So if you have bright sunlight, basically sunlight all day, here's some examples of fruit, vegetables that you can plant if you have bright sunlight. Okay, some gardens are partially shaded, and that's probably more the case of a residential place. And yes, you can grow vegetables in a partial shade. You may have to be, I don't think this guy's planting himself trouble with putting trees here between and have the garden between trees and a rock wall. So, but he'll find that out. That's not mine. What's a gardener to grow in these shady spots? Here's some, okay, tolerate partial shade. Okay, so basically, if you say, if I eat the roots or shoots, then the plant usually requires less light. So beets, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, turnip. Most of these are called cold crops, and they're very good candidates for the fall garden. Maturity rates. You also want to consider the maturity rate. So I've made this statement that, in the spring, we're working between the last frost and the first 100-degree day. And in the fall, we're working from that 100-degree day and the first freeze or frost. So we're always being pushed. So I try to plant in the spring as early as I can, and in the fall as early as the temps will allow for the vegetable to sprout and to grow. So there's things such as germination temperatures, and we'll talk about those later. So here they are, quick. And also, if you're doing gardening with children or a school garden, these are really good candidates to plant for a school garden. The children can plant them and harvest them in the same semester. Here's some with a little bit longer maturity rates. Okra is probably not, and corn's not. And tomatoes are not very good for school gardens because the tomatoes are ripe into June, and then you need to plant them in July and August for the fall crop. And it's a little challenging to get ripe tomatoes before the frost. But these others, broccoli and onions and cabbage, those will withstand a frost and in some cases a freeze. I know broccoli will withstand down to about 25 degrees. So I have picked fall broccoli in March. That's a great crop for school gardens, so the kids can plant them in September and pick them several times, because with broccoli, you pick the head and it shoots after that, it shoots up smaller heads, and you pick those and it shoots up smaller than that heads. And you can go about 4 or 5 iterations on that. So they always have fun. And if you're organic, they can also eat it in the garden. Okay, a little longer maturity rates. I want to say cauliflower, I only grow in the fall. If I plant it in September, then that would be harvested from late December to sometime in February. Depends on the weather and all that. With cauliflower, you pick the head and that's it. You get one crop. And sweet potatoes, you plant those in May and dig them in September. So that's not a good one for school gardens. So there you go. Some crops that take a little longer maturity. And most of those you'll see in the spring. If you want to plant pumpkins for the October, then plant them in July. You may have to shade them a little bit as the plants, if they're out in the full sun. Okay, plan your most successful garden ever by using crops that naturally thrive where you live. What vegetables do we grow? Okay, the questions, my answer is always, what do you use? Or what do you eat? Or what does your wife eat? Or your husband? Or your mother-in-law? So somebody in the family likes it before you. Don't plant it if nobody likes it. Succession and rotation plans. So you want to rotate your crops. You've heard that of farmers rotating their crops. Well, you do the same thing with your backyard garden. If you're gardening in pots, then every 2 or 3 years, you can just change out the soil in the pot, dump it out in your flower bed, and start over with a new mix. You're dumping out the residual disease from that tomato plant or whatever it is that you're planting in there. If you have enough pots and rotating different crops in there, then you could use it longer than 2 or 3 years. Okay, the size, will it fit? So as I said before, you don't put that big tomato, large tomato with non-determinate that grows to 8 foot tall in a 5-gallon pot. It just will not perform. So don't do that. And what's adapted to our climate. So, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute here. It says, use recommended varieties for North Central Texas. Okay, so we're going to go to the Aggie Horticulture website and do a little tour there. So write this down, aggiehorticulture.tamu.edu. So here's the Aggie Horticulture website, and note that it's aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. This is my first go-to reference. If I have a question or get a question from somebody, I'm going to go to this website for vegetables, vegetable resources. So it's pretty easy to navigate through it. So I clicked on vegetable resources, and now there's a couple of icons that I like to use. Easy Gardening's fact sheets is a great resource, and I'm going to click on that. And here there's a host of different vegetables that you might want to plant. So if I click on beans, and note that everything is not exactly like you think it ought to be, because here's beans down here, green beans, okay? So just if you don't see at first what you want to research, look down through the whole list and see if there's something else that it. So I clicked on green beans, and here's a sheet that tells me about green beans. It tells me the varieties, and you could consider this in Texas, okay? So it's not limited to north central Texas, and we'll explore that in a minute. So there's different kind of green snap beans, lima beans, soil preparation. So it's going to tell you what kind of soil the beans like, how to plant the beans, what kind of fertilizer, or how much fertilizer, how to water, the row spacing, and care during the season, insects, what bugs are going to bug me, and sometimes it'll give you pictures of insects or disease that may affect your plants. So, and it even tells you how to serve green beans. Well, a lot of you have your own ideas, so go for that. So there's in the Easy Gardening series, I'm going to go back to the list and note that there's other things here like fertilizing. There's soil solarization that's with the clear plastic that's anchored to the ground, covered up edges so that it doesn't vent, can get up to 170 degrees. So it's going to kill bugs, nematodes, and it'll also kill a lot of weed seeds. So that's a great way, and you don't have to add any chemicals to your ground. So there's a couple of nice places to research for your garden. Okay, the other is vegetable variety recommendations that I use. And this first click, I come up with a map of Texas, and we happen to be in Region B, which is called North Central Texas. In this, and I clicked on that, and I've selected all vegetable varieties, and I can do a particular vegetable, but I always just like to use all vegetable varieties, and I'll enter. And this comes up with a list, and note this list is recommended varieties for North Central Texas, okay? So if you haven't gardened here before and you don't have experience, say with beans, here's some varieties that you will have a better chance of having luck. So for example, top crop and tender crop, they're a great green bean without the strings. So they're, this top crop, the last in the bean list, says 50. That's 50 days to harvest, okay, from planting. So there you go. If you want it quickly, and again, that would be a good candidate for a school garden because they could plant in September and harvest them in November. Just know you'd have to have a fairly large space to have enough to do anything with. The lima beans take a little longer. So there you go. There's about any kind of vegetable. Asparagus only due in February. You buy the root stock, and there's a fairly complex system to plant them. You'll find that on the Easy Gardening series. So if you want to do asparagus, it's a little work at first, but my asparagus has been there for 25 years. Plant one time, harvest for 25 years. So there you go. Okra you can plant in the spring or the fall, or usually the spring planting carries over into the fall until freeze. There's broccoli. So if you plant broccoli, I always recommend the large head variety. I don't care for the broccolini because it has much less production. And with the larger heads, the Pac-Man and Green Comet. So if you're buying that at the store, I would say read the package, make sure that you're buying a broccoli that has the large head. If you like the other kind for stir fry or whatever, then that's fine, go for it. Or just take your ranch dressing out to the garden and have a little snack right there. So notice that in tomatoes, they break it up into different sizes, okay? And the D's and the I's here, I'm looking at Early Girl. It says D is for determinate. So a determinate tomato grows to a height and produces its fruit, and then it's done. So I think of farm production. So you want all the fruit to be ripe at the same time so you can have an efficient harvest. Indeterminate, which is what I like, the fruit is going to spread out over a longer period of time, maybe a month or more. And those plants, you can think tomato vine versus tomato bush. In the summer of 2018, I pulled out a tomato plant from my greenhouse that I'd planted in August of 17. It was a Juliet, small variety, grape tomato. And the tomato plant was 15 feet long. So there you go. You can grow some pretty big vines. And it did produce a lot of tomatoes. Okay, when you go to the store to buy seeds, take this list with you, unless you already know what you're going to plant. And if at all possible, buy varieties that are on this list. That's another good reason to buy online in like a Burpee Seeds or Park Seeds or some of the other seed catalogs, that you'll be more likely to be able to match up the variety with what you want to plant. So like if you go to Home Depot, the guy in North Carolina didn't choose what you're going to plant in Texas. We'll go back just briefly on the website, Vegetable Problem Solver. There's some wonderful pictures here, especially for tomatoes. So if you have problems with your fruit or your vines, here's a picture that you could match up with your conditions at home, and you'd click on that and it'll tell you what control measure you need to take to avoid that. So that's probably enough. And that's good for spring or fall, whatever, anytime you're growing those tomatoes or watermelons or whatever. Okay, again, aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. I don't really go to the commercial production. Most of us will not need that. So we toured the Aggie Horticulture website, and now seeds or plants. I frequently get the question, what vegetables do you use seedlings, and which vegetables do you use seeds in your garden? This is kind of a busy sheet, but I'm going to use it just as a reference. So as I go down this, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, but you'll see that most of these, well, asparagus we talked about, broccoli I will buy plants, or I will start my own plants. For the spring, I will start them in January. For the fall, you'd start them probably in July or early August, where you'd plant the seed for the seedlings. Or you just wait till September and go to the box store and buy some. Depends on how many you're growing, you know. Brussels sprouts, they do well in the fall, not so well in the spring because it gets hot, and just like cabbage, it wants to, it gets the little green worms, the cabbage loppers. So, but Brussels sprouts will withstand 25 degrees. I have picked, I actually have taken out Brussels sprouts in March when I was planting the spring crop. So there's a good, if you like Brussels, then go for them. Cauliflower, I do that in the fall only. And again, plant that in September. In the spring, cauliflower it just takes longer for it to develop. And by the time it is developed, then it's hot and it wants to bolt. So you don't get a nice, clean, white head. In the fall, you do, because it's cool when it's developing. And another trick is to just wound the leaf the leaves that are close to the flower, and lay them over on top of. Don't totally just wound the spine of the leaf so that it wilts over on top of the cauliflower, and you'll get whiter, prettier fruit. Okay, so most of these onions I use sets. Tomatoes I will use transplants, and with tomatoes I'll buy them from a seed catalog. I like to plant about 8 different varieties, and I can't always find those in the store. So I tend to buy the seed and start my own plants. And I do that about January 1st. This past year, I set the tomatoes out on February 28th. So that's a little earlier. That's the earliest I've ever done, but the weather forecast looked okay. And I put the frost cloth around it, so give it some protection. In the fall, you can take that frost cloth and in November, wrap your tomato plant. Don't wait until they say tonight it's going to be 30 degrees. Go out there on a nice day and wrap it up, so you get that extra protection if you're in the ground with your tomatoes. If you're in a pot, you can wrap it, but you can also just get a dolly and roll the pot into the garage or some protected space. And after that 2-day, 25-degree day temperature spout is over, we usually get 2 or 3 more weeks of nice weather in the fall. So invariably, it gives you just one cold spot. And if you can take the tomato in, then you're not forced into fried green tomatoes. Okay. So that's just some hints that I have for you. So choose the best plants, recommended varieties, okay. Fruit trees, vegetables, buy the healthiest specimens of the most recommended types. Okay, do your homework ahead of time. So for the spring garden, you do that planting in December, January. For the fall garden, do it in July. Also, you'd be preparing your beds for the fall garden in July and August. Season, when do I plant each vegetable type? Okay, and here we'll go back to that same handout. This happens to be from Marshall Grain. I'm not trying to plug them, but it was handy. So here, this has for all the different vegetables that's over on the left column. Kind of in the middle, it has spring planting dates. And then right next to that, to the right, is the fall planting dates. Okay, so this is a good guideline. I don't use this as a Bible, so to speak, because I know the one thing that I really have issue was tomatoes in the spring. It gives you till May 12th, and I'm here to tell you that if you wait till May 12th to set your tomatoes out, you won't get any tomatoes. And I'll tell you why in just a minute here. So it's good to have a chart like this so you know when to plant. I see it's more important in the springtime to plant as soon as you can. In the fall, again, we're wrestling between the 100-degree heat and the first frost. So here's the chart that you don't see very often, and it's maybe a little complicated, but if I take the first beet, and the green dot is the practical temp. So if I put beet seeds out at 45 degrees soil temp, then they will probably germinate and sprout. The ideal temperature is the black dot. So the beet seed really likes 85 degrees. So that's probably why beets would be a better fall crop, because you're going to plant them when it's hot. They're going to sprout, and then they're going to get ripe and mature when it's cool. So you're going to have a better quality crop. There's carrots, the same thing. Carrots will carry throughout the winter. I've had at the school garden, kids pull the carrots in February and March that they planted in September. So here's corn. If you want to plant corn, that's a great crop for the fall. And you notice that the practical temp is 55 degrees. So when I plant corn in the spring, it's I'm saying the soil temp is 55 degrees. So if you take a meat thermometer from your husband's barbecue grill or whatever, if you want to spare your life, just stick it down in the soil about the depth that you're going to plant the seed, and see what it says. If it says 55, that's the soil temp that you'd use. But look at corn. It really likes 95 degrees. So if you go out there and plant corn in August, it's going to jump up. I'd make the rows, put water in the row, and then lay the seeds in the row, and then cover up with dry soil. And doing that method, I've had corn come up in 3 days. In the spring, corn comes up in 2 weeks or more. So that's the difference this makes, is the soil temp. And this is really a good chart to have in your reference book, in your seed box. So there's tomatoes. They like it. They like it hot. So 85 degrees. So that's why it's best to start them in the greenhouse. And know also that the tomato blossoms that you get in the spring will, if you plant them late in the season, like in May, at 90 degrees, thereabouts, plus or minus, depending on variety, but about 90 degrees, the blossoms will not set fruit. So it's just too hot for them to do that. So you can plant them in May. One year I planted at Mayfest because I had some tomatoes damaged by the hail. And those that I replanted in May had no fruit whatsoever. So if you're wondering why your tomatoes in the summer didn't have any fruit, that could be a reason. There's lots of other reasons, but okay, enough on that. Soil, do not compromise, okay? So don't scrimp on the bed preparation, okay? The smaller the plant type, it's annual or perennial. For example, if I'm planting lettuce, I make that seed bed really smooth. In fact, with lettuce, with the fourth graders, I will have them just smooth out the planting bed and spread the seeds on top of that, and then cover the seeds with compost that's been sifted, so it's very fine. So then we don't have the problem of too deep. Some of these little small seeds, if you plant them too deep, they'll never reach the surface, and you'll never have a salad for your lettuce. Okay, essential elements. How am I going to fertilize? So here's some essential elements, and notice in the red that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So when you buy a bag of fertilizer, it has NPK. K is if you look at the element chart, K is the symbol for potassium, okay? So every bag of fertilizer, if it advertised that it's a fertilizer, then it has to have the percent nitrogen, the percent phosphorus, and potassium. Okay, so there's other minor elements, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur you see in the yellow color, and then lots of trace elements. I will point out that tomatoes like calcium and they like zinc. So if you want to add a little calcium and zinc to your tomatoes as they're growing, that's a good thing. So how do I know how much fertilizer to put on my garden? And this applies any time of the year. Or how much do I need to put on the yard? I know we used to say 15-5-10 mixture for your yard. Well, we've since discovered that Texas soil has lots of phosphorus, so that's not necessarily a good thing. So now it's more nitrogen only on your yard. But how do I know? Here it is. Soil test. Okay, you want to do a soil test, and you can do that whether you're gardening in the yard or in a pot or in a raised bed, whatever you're doing. Write that address down, website, http, okay, soiltesting.tamu.edu. You go to that website to get the form, and you can use a paper bag. We'll talk more in the next slide here. Okay, so there are some general recommendations, but let's not dwell on those right now. So here's the soil testing form, and note that in the upper right-hand corner it says SU20. So that's that is the version for 2020. So whatever year you're in, you want to make sure that you're using the current version. I think they revise that form every year. And probably the main thing is they revise the pricing. So here's the pricing down here. And I think it's like $12 for a basic test, which is the one that most of us really need. They will test the trace element or micro elements. Back up. They will test the NPK and the trace elements, not the micro. So here's a soil test results. So I did a test of some soil that I bought from a commercial place, and you'd think, well, they said it was good stuff, and it was called Dairy Mix. So gosh, it's got dairy stuff in it, and it ought to just really grow. But when they dump it out in your truck or on the ground, it's smoking. So that tells me that that mix is using up nitrogen. So the decomposition process uses lots of nitrogen. So right there, and this soil test tells me the very first line, nitrate N is nitrogen. And you see the chart, it goes about a fourth of the way over. You see the dotted line in the middle there, that's where you're targeting for. So anyway, that soil was way low on nitrogen. It was over, almost toxic on phosphorus. So, and that stands to reason because it's a manure product. So you're going to have lots of phosphorus. So if you're using manure products, especially get your soil test and don't use fertilizer with that middle number. anything but 0. Okay, down here it says phosphorus. I'm at the very bottom of the page. Phosphorus is highly elevated, and it says avoid phosphorus for the next 5 years. Okay, and I've tested that soil since then, and I got the same alert. So it takes a long time for phosphorus to work its way out of the soil, to leach through. Not so with nitrogen. So there's a good reason. You see the potassium is elevated. So that's probably why they like to say if you have no other information, then just use a nitrogen-based fertilizer is the best way to go. Okay, so here's good soil. And this happens to be potatoes. And this mulch is only half done, so it was done for, the picture was done for a demonstration purpose. That so irrigation is important, and I can just put a hose in that trough, if you will, to the right of each row, and it runs to the other end. The water does. Again, still on soil. Here's a picture in January. So I'm getting ready to plant tomatoes, and this on top of the ground is compost. So I've put 10 wheelbarrows full of compost in each row. So that's 6 cubic foot in each wheelbarrow. So if I didn't fill it completely, let's say 50 cubic feet, that's really 2 cubic yards of compost in each row. So with a tomato, that runs down to about 2 cubic feet per tomato. So you say a bag of compost per plant if you're using the large variety plants, the indeterminates, okay? So that does really well. And the next year, it provides benefit for the next crop that goes into that space. Because the next year, that tomato crop is going to be on the other side of the little fence that you see to the left. So every year they get to rotate to a new spot. Rotation is important. And you do it by families, okay? Just since we mentioned rotation, do it by families. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant are all in the same family. So you don't want to chase one after the other. There's a well-prepared seed bed. And I say this is not my picture. So that's probably an engineer that did that. So if you like that kind of activity, go for it. Okay, in the fall, this is a spring picture, but this is row cover or frost cloth. So you could put that over your crops in the fall. If you had a row of beans and you wanted to cover them, you wanted to carry them over into December to avoid that one freeze that we have in late November. That's a way to do it. You have to support the frost cloth up off the plant foliage, because if the foliage is right up against the fabric, then it'll freeze. So that's an idea for protection. And yeah, you could go out there, an individual plant, and put a bucket over it or something like that, and that works too. Okay, so here's, again, I've talked about the frost cloth, and that's in the lower right, how you do a tomato cage. If your cages are not that big, that's fine, just wrap them up. And if you're trying to protect from frost, then you would include the top. You'd cover up the top of the cage with the frost cloth. When I do tomatoes, I will trim off the lower limbs, the upper left there, so that the rainwater or irrigation water is not throwing soil or splashing soil up to the leaves. That's a good way to get early blight. So you just kind of trim it up. And the best irrigation would be a drip hose down beside that tomato plant, And if it's spraying at all, then turn it where it sprays down to the soil, not up to the plant. You'll avoid a lot of disease. Okay, so that's the presentation. Have fun, keep gardening. Thank you.